You drag yourself through the lower hab blocks of Hive World Tertius, your legs heavy as scrap metal after another 18-hour shift in the Manufactorum. The taste of recycled air sits bitter on your tongue, mixed with the metallic tang of blood from where you bit down too hard during the grinding monotony. Your hands still shake from operating the heavy machinery, 12 hours of feeding metal sheets into the hungry maw of industrial processors, watching them emerge as components for weapons you'll never see, for wars you'll never understand. The hab block corridors stretch before you like the bowels of some great beast. Flickering lumen strips cast sickly yellow pools across rust-stained walls, and the air hangs thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, cooking groks, and the ever-present undertone of industrial chemicals that permeates everything in the hive. You step over a sleeping form huddled against a wall, another worker, perhaps, or someone who couldn't make their quota. In the hive, the distinction between the living and the discarded grows thinner each day. Your small hab unit lies just 3 floors up, a cramped space barely large enough for a sleeping alcove and a food dispenser. It's not much, but after 18 hours of standing, the thought of lying down drives you forward. Tomorrow will bring another shift, another day of survival in service to the Emperor. This is your life. This is everyone's life. You've never known anything else, never questioned why it has to be this way. The ground trembles. At first, you think it's just the deep machinery of the hive, the massive generators and processing plants that never sleep. But this is different. This vibration comes from above, not below, and it carries with it something that makes your skin crawl. You pause in the stairwell, one hand gripping the corroded railing, listening. Then you hear it. Distant at first, like thunder rolling across the hab blocks. But thunder doesn't scream. Thunder doesn't carry the wet sound of tearing metal and the unmistakable crack of La's fire. Your blood runs cold as the sounds grow closer, echoing through the superstructure of the hive. Explosions. Real explosions, not the controlled detonations of the mining levels. The kind that kill people. You climb faster now, driven by a primal need to reach your hab unit, to barricade yourself inside and wait for whatever storm is coming to pass. But as you reach your floor, you hear something that stops you dead in the corridor. Silence. The screaming has stopped. The explosions have ceased. Even the ever-present hum of the hive's machinery seems muted. It's the kind of silence that comes after violence, heavy and expectant, as if the very air is holding its breath. You creep toward your hab unit, but something draws your attention to the small window at the end of the corridor, a crack in the hive's hull that some lazy maintenance crew never bothered to seal properly. Through it, you can see down into the main thoroughfare 3 levels below, where the market stalls usually buzz with activity even at this late hour. Nothing moves in the street. But then, through the drifting smoke and settling debris, you see them. They move like gods made manifest, towering figures in ceramite plate that gleams even in the dim light filtering through the hive's upper levels. Their massive forms seem to glide rather than walk, each step measured and purposeful, as if they own not just the ground beneath their feet but the very air around them. You've heard stories, of course. Everyone has. The Emperor's angels, the Adeptus Astartes, humanity's greatest defenders. Your heart, which had been hammering with fear, begins to slow. Relief floods through you like cool water. The explosions, the screaming, it must have been some kind of attack, cultists perhaps, or worse. But now the Space Marines are here, and everything will be all right. The stories always end the same way. The angels arrive, the enemies of humanity fall, and order is restored. You press closer to the window, suddenly desperate to see these legendary warriors with your own eyes. How many people can say they've witnessed the Adeptus Astartes in action? This is a moment to remember, a story to tell your shiftmates tomorrow. One of the armored figures stops directly below your window. Even from 3 stories up, his presence is overwhelming. The bulk of his armor makes him seem more like a walking fortress than a man. All brutal angles and functional plating designed to turn aside weapons that would vaporize a normal human. Purity seals flutter from his shoulder guards like small prayers given form, and the blue and gold of his heraldry marks him as one of the Ultramarines, the most noble of all the Space Marine chapters, if the stories are true. His helmet turns upward, and for a moment, you're certain he's looking directly at you. The eyelenses glow with a faint amber light that seems to pierce right through the window, through your skin, straight to your soul. You shrink back instinctively, suddenly aware that you're witnessing something you were never meant to see. But then you notice the damage. The left side of his helmet is cracked, a spider web of fractures radiating out from what must have been a tremendous impact. Coolant, or something else, leaks from the breach, hissing as it hits the ground and sending up wisps of vapor that catch the light like ghostly fingers. The helmet's systems are failing. Sparks dance across the surface where internal components are exposed to air. The Space Marine reaches up with one massive gauntleted hand. You lean forward despite yourself, drawn by morbid fascination. You've never seen a Space Marine without his helmet. In all the stories, all the propaganda images, they're always fully armored, always hidden behind those impassive faceplates. The helmet is part of their mystique, part of what makes them seem more than human. But now, as his fingers find purchase on the damaged ceramite, you realize you're about to witness something that few mortals ever see. The helmet disengages with a soft hiss of escaping air. He lifts it away from his head with the same care one might show removing a sacred relic, and in the pale light filtering down through the hive's superstructure, you see his face. You see what the Emperor's angels truly are. The first thing that strikes you isn't any single feature, but the wrongness of the proportions. The skull is too large, stretched and elongated in ways that make your brain struggle to process what you're seeing. It's still recognizably humanoid, but only in the way that a reflection in disturbed water is recognizable, familiar elements arranged in patterns that feel fundamentally alien. His skin is pale, almost translucent, and you can see the dark tracery of veins beneath the surface. But these aren't normal veins. They're too thick, too dark, branching in patterns that speak of extensive internal modifications. The jawline juts forward more than any human jaw should, giving his profile an almost bestial cast, and when he turns slightly, you catch a glimpse of teeth that are too large, too sharp, arranged in a mouth that seems designed for purposes other than speech. But it's the eyes that truly break your mind. They're enormous, easily twice the size of normal human eyes, and they move with an independence that no human gaze should possess. As you watch in horrified fascination, the pupils dilate and contract in response to stimuli you can't perceive, while a thin membrane, translucent and utterly alien, slides across each eye from the inside corner, blinking sideways like some great predator. This is no angel. This is no savior of humanity. This is something that was human once, perhaps, but has been carved and molded and rebuilt into something else entirely. Something that wears the shape of man but serves purposes that transcend human understanding. You're looking at a living weapon, a creature designed by minds that view human flesh not as sacred, but as raw material to be improved upon. The Space Marine's head turns, and those terrible eyes focus on your window. For a moment that stretches like eternity, you stare into the face of humanity's protector, and what stares back is something that might once have been a child, a brother, a son, but is now as far removed from humanity as the Emperor himself. Then he replaces his helmet, and the moment passes, but you remain at the window, trembling, as a single question burns itself into your mind. If this is what our saviors have become, what does that make us? You sink to the floor of your hab unit, the thin metal walls suddenly feeling inadequate against the cosmos of horror you've just glimpsed. Your hands shake as you try to process what you've seen, but your mind keeps returning to one inescapable fact. That thing in the street was once human, once a child, perhaps not unlike the young boys you see in the lower hab blocks, playing with scrap metal and dreaming of better lives. How does a human child become that? The Imperial propaganda feeds never discuss the process in detail. They speak of recruitment, of ascension, of young boys being chosen for the honor of joining the Emperor's finest. The language is always elevated, always noble. They use words like enhancement and purification, as if what happens to these children is something beautiful, something to be celebrated. But you've seen the result. You've looked into those alien eyes and witnessed what purification truly means. Consider, for a moment, your younger brother. Imagine him at 10 years old, still small enough to fit through the maintenance shafts, still young enough to laugh at simple pleasures, still human enough to cry when he's frightened. Now imagine representatives of the Adeptus Astartes arriving at your hab block, their massive forms filling the corridors like walking nightmares, and imagine them pointing at your brother. "This one," they would say. "He shows promise." And your brother would be taken, not asked, not invited, taken. Because in the Imperium of man, the needs of humanity always supersede the needs of humans. What happens next is described in the medical texts as the process of ascension. 19 separate surgical procedures, each one designed to rebuild the human body from the inside out. The first surgery replaces his heart with something called a secondary heart, a backup system that allows him to survive injuries that would kill a normal human instantly. The second implants an osmodula, an organ that will cause his bones to grow and thicken until his skeleton becomes a living suit of armor. They insert a biscopia to build muscle mass beyond human limits, a hemostamen to regulate his blood chemistry, a Laramen's organ to seal wounds before they can become fatal, an oculobe to enhance his vision to superhuman levels, a Lyman's ear for perfect balance and enhanced hearing, an omophagia that allows him to gain memories by consuming flesh. 19 organs. 19 alien growths inserted into a child's body over the course of several years, each surgery more invasive than the last, each modification pushing him further from his original human form. And that's just the physical transformation. The psychological conditioning begins even before the surgeries are complete. Imperial doctrine stripped away layer by layer, revealing the harsh truths beneath. Personal attachments severed. Individual identity subsumed into chapter identity. The capacity for fear, for doubt, for mercy, carefully calibrated and controlled until only the perfect warrior remains. They call it mental conditioning, but you've seen the result. You've looked into those eyes and seen the absence where human emotion once lived. The procedures don't just modify the body, they excavate the soul and replace it with something more useful. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire process is how seamlessly it's integrated into imperial society. The recruitment ceremonies are public celebrations, with proud families offering up their sons to serve the emperor. The children go willingly, believing the propaganda that promises them honor and glory. They have no way of knowing that they're volunteering to cease being human. How much modification can occur before humanity is lost entirely? At what point does enhancement become replacement? When your brother's bones have been replaced with ceramite hard calcium deposits, when his blood has been altered to carry toxins and combat stimulants, when his brain has been conditioned to process the deaths of millions as acceptable losses, is he still your brother? The Imperium has an answer to that question, and it's built into the very terminology they use. Space Marines are not called enhanced humans or modified soldiers. They are called post-human. The prefix says everything. They are what comes after humanity, not an improvement upon it. And yet, the Imperium depends on regular humans accepting Space Marines as protectors, as heroes, as angels sent by the Emperor himself. This acceptance requires that the true nature of the Astartes remain hidden from public view. Hence the helmets, hence the ceremonies that always show them fully armored, hence the careful management of public interactions. Because if every Imperial citizen could see what you've just seen, if every parent could look into the face of a Space Marine and recognize what their enhanced child had become, the entire system would collapse under the weight of its own horror. The recruitment would continue, of course. The Imperium's need for super soldiers would not diminish. But it would become what it truly is. Not a celebration of human potential, but a systematic harvesting of children to feed the war machine. You sit in your hab unit. staring at the wall where a faded image of the Emperor watches over your meager possessions, and you begin to understand the carefully constructed lie that underlies your entire civilization. The Space Marines aren't humanity's salvation. They're humanity's sacrifice. 10,000 years of children offered up on the altar of survival, their faces carved away and rebuilt in the image of war itself. And somewhere tonight, on 10,000 worlds across the Imperium, another child is being selected for ascension. Another family is celebrating their good fortune. Another young human is taking their first steps toward becoming something else entirely. The process never stops. The machine that transforms children into monsters runs day and night, fed by the willing compliance of a species that has forgotten the difference between salvation and damnation. You close your eyes, but you can still see those alien features, still feel the weight of that inhuman gaze. Tomorrow, you'll return to your shift at the Manufactorum. You'll produce components for weapons you'll never see, for wars you'll never understand, in service of angels whose faces you're never meant to glimpse. And you'll never speak of what you've seen tonight, because some truths are too terrible for words, and some questions are too dangerous to ask. But the knowledge will remain, burning in your mind like a brand. Humanity's protectors have forgotten how to be human, and that might be exactly what the Imperium intended all along. You are Servoskull designation MT-7739, a Medici Servitor technician assigned to the Apothecarian of Strike Cruiser Fist of Macragge. Your memory banks have been wiped of this incident 17 times now, but fragments persist like scar tissue in your data cores. Somehow, impossibly, pieces of what you witnessed continue to surface during routine maintenance cycles, forcing the Tech Marines to perform increasingly invasive memory purges. But they cannot erase everything. Some experiences burn too deep into even artificial consciousness. You were summoned to Medical Bay Gamma 7 during the Calth campaign. Battle Brother Titus of the 2nd Company had taken a direct hit from a word-bearer's bolt pistol during the assault on Shrine City Epsilon. The round had penetrated his helmet's left optical array, spiderwebbing the ceramite and breaching the environmental seals. Standard protocol demanded immediate medical attention for any helmet breach, not because Space Marines require constant life support, but because exposure of the unhelmed face violated the Codex Astartes regulations on civilian interaction. But there were no civilians present. Only you, a servitor whose organic components had been stripped away long ago, whose loyalty was ensured through neural conditioning rather than faith. What harm could there be in allowing you to witness what lay beneath the ceramite? When you arrived at the medical bay, Battle Brother Titus was seated on the examination table, his massive form dwarfing the reinforced furniture. His damaged helmet sat beside him like a discarded mask, coolant still dripping from the cracked optical housing. And for the first time in your decades of service, you looked upon the face of the Emperor's angels without the filtering lens of their armor. Your optical sensors immediately began cataloging anomalies. The skull was elongated, stretched upward and backward to accommodate the enlarged cranium required by the catalepsian node and sus, and membrane implants. But the expansion wasn't uniform. Certain areas bulged outward where additional brain tissue had been grafted in, while others showed the telltale scarring of surgical modification. The bone itself appeared thicker, denser, with a slightly yellow tint that spoke of calcium deposits far beyond normal human parameters. The facial structure retained human elements, but they were wrong in ways that triggered error warnings in your pattern recognition systems. The jaw protruded forward more than any baseline human anatomy would allow, and when Titus spoke, you could see that his dental configuration had been extensively modified. Additional molars crowded the back of his mouth, designed for processing the varied and often questionable sustenance required during extended campaigns. The canine teeth were pronounced, almost predatory, while the incisors showed signs of reinforcement that allowed them to serve as tools when necessary. But it was the soft tissue that truly disturbed your sensors. The skin was pale, almost translucent, with a texture that registered as simultaneously thick and fragile. Beneath the surface, you could trace the dark networks of modified blood vessels, far more extensive than baseline human circulation. These weren't merely enlarged veins and arteries. They were entirely new circulatory pathways, designed to carry the exotic chemicals and combat stimulants that allowed space marines to function beyond human limitations. Subcutaneous implants created irregular bulges across the facial landscape. The preomner predigestive implant was clearly visible as a hard ridge along the left side of his jaw, while the neuroglottis taste enhancement organ created a subtle distortion around his mouth and throat. Each implant served its purpose, but collectively, they transformed the face into a map of surgical intervention, a topography of enhancement that bore only passing resemblance to human features. The eyes, though, Emperor's throne, the eyes were what finally overwhelmed your processing capabilities. They were enormous, nearly twice the size of baseline human ocular organs, necessary to accommodate the extensive modifications of the oculobe implant. The irises showed flecks of artificial enhancement, tiny geometric patterns that spoke of built-in targeting systems and low-light amplification. But most disturbing was their independence of movement. You watched in fascination as each eye tracked different targets, processing multiple streams of visual information simultaneously. When Titus blinked, you witnessed the true alienness of his physiology. The nictitating membranes swept across his eyes from the inner corners, translucent films that moved perpendicular to his normal eyelids. It was a thoroughly reptilian gesture, utterly at odds with any human expression, and it triggered something deep in your organic memory engrams, some primordial recognition that what you were observing was not human, had never been human, despite its origins. The voice, when he spoke, carried resonances that no human throat should produce. The vocal modifications created harmonics that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the hind brain, triggering responses of awe and submission. Every word carried the weight of authority not through volume, but through frequencies that human nervous systems were evolutionarily programmed to obey. "Servitor," Battle Brother Titus said, and the sound sent cascade failures through your emotional processing subroutines. Complete your analysis and withdraw. You completed your medical assessment in silence, cataloging injuries that would have been fatal to any baseline human, but were merely inconvenient to the post-human physiology before you. As you worked, you found yourself studying the subtle movements of his facial muscles, the way his expressions formed and dissolved without following human emotional patterns. Even at rest, his features maintained a predatory alertness that spoke of a mind calibrated for warfare rather than social interaction. When your analysis was complete, you turned to leave, but as you reached the door, Battle Brother Titus called out again. "Servitor, you have seen nothing here that requires recording." And you understood, even through your artificial consciousness, that this was not merely an instruction. It was a warning. What you had witnessed was not meant for mechanical eyes, any more than it was meant for human ones. The face beneath the helmet was a secret, not because it revealed weakness, but because it revealed truth. The Space Marines were not enhanced humans. They were something else entirely, wearing human features like an ill-fitting disguise. As you left Medical Bay Gamma 7, your memory cores automatically began the standard post-encounter purge, wiping away the specific details of what you had witnessed. But some impressions ran too deep for even military-grade conditioning to erase entirely. The wrongness of those proportions, the alien quality of those movements, the fundamental recognition that you had looked upon something that had once been human but was human no longer. They have purged your memory bank 17 times now, but fragments remain. Each time, they dig deeper, excise more extensively, but they cannot eliminate the core recognition without destroying your functionality entirely. And so you continue to serve, carrying within your artificial consciousness the terrible knowledge of what humanity's angels have truly become. You are not the only one. Throughout the Imperium, servitors and tech priests carry similar fragments, partial memories of encounters with unhelmed space marines. The Mechanicus has developed increasingly sophisticated memory modification techniques in response, but the truth has a way of persisting, of finding purchase even in minds designed for perfect obedience. Because some revelations are too profound for simple erasure. Some truths rewrite the very foundations of consciousness itself. You have seen the face of the Emperor's angels, and you know that angels do not have faces like that. Angels do not move with that predatory grace, do not speak with that inhuman authority, do not possess eyes that track targets with mechanical precision. Angels are creatures of light and grace and beauty. What you witnessed in Medical Bay Gamma 7 was something else entirely, a weapon crafted from human flesh, designed by minds that viewed children not as precious gifts to be protected, but as raw materials to be refined into instruments of war. And the most terrifying realization of all is that this transformation was intentional, deliberate, necessary. The Imperium did not create monsters by accident. It created them because monsters were what survival required. You are Chapter Serf Marcus Valen, and you have served the Ultramarines for 37 years. You have cleaned their armor, maintained their weapons, and prepared their quarters with the devotion of a man who understands that his life's meaning derives entirely from service to the Emperor's angels. In all that time, you have learned to recognize the subtle signs of their moods, the minute changes in posture and voice that indicate approval or displeasure. You have also learned, through necessity and survival, to read their faces when they remove their helmets during maintenance rituals. Tonight, you stand in the reclusiam of the strike cruiser Calgar's Might, preparing the sanctification oils for tomorrow's campaign. The chamber is dimly lit by votive candles, their flickering light casting dancing shadows across the carved walls where the names of fallen battle brothers are inscribed in high Gothic. It is a place of reflection, of remembrance, and of transformation. Brother Sergeant Cassius enters the chamber, his massive form filling the doorway like a living bulkhead. He has just returned from the Apothecarian, where the final modifications of his ascension process were completed. Today, he ceased to be an aspirant and became a full battle brother of the Ultramarines. Today, he became one of the Emperor's angels. You have known Cassius since he was brought to the chapter 17 years ago, a 10-year-old boy from the hive world of Calth, selected for his genetic compatibility and warrior potential. You remember him during his early training, when flashes of the child he had been still showed through the conditioning. The way he would sometimes smile when he thought no one was watching. The careful questions he would ask about the worlds beyond Macrag. The nightmares he thought no one could hear. All of that is gone now. Brother Sergeant Cassius approaches the mirror that stands beside the altar, and with mechanical precision, he disengages his helmet seals. The ceramite lifts away with a soft hiss, and you watch as he looks upon his own reflection for the first time since the final modifications were completed. What stares back from the polished metal is no longer recognizably the boy who arrived 17 years ago. The face that regards itself in the mirror bears the hallmarks of complete psychological conditioning. Where once there might have been curiosity in those enlarged eyes, there is now only calculated assessment. Where once there might have been wonder or fear or joy, there is now only the cold evaluation of tactical parameters. You watch as he studies his own reflection with the same dispassionate interest he might show when examining a weapon's specifications. His expression doesn't change as he catalogs the modifications. The elongated skull, the predatory jaw line, the alien proportions that mark him as post-human. There is no horror at what he has become, no grief for what he has lost. These emotions have been surgically removed as thoroughly as any unwanted organ, replaced with more useful psychological functions. Serf Valen, he says, and his voice carries the new harmonics of his modified vocal cords. Record in the chapter logs, Brother Sergeant Cassius has completed ascension. All biological and psychological parameters are within acceptable limits. You make the notation on your data slate, but you cannot stop watching his face in the mirror. Somewhere in the back of your mind, You remember the child who arrived 17 years ago, a boy who had cried for his mother during the first night, who had asked if he would ever see his family again, who had flinched away from pain before the conditioning taught him to embrace it. That boy is dead. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally dead. The procedures that created Brother Sergeant Cassius required the complete destruction of the personality that came before. The memories remain. He can still recall his childhood on Calth, can still name his parents and siblings, but the emotional connections that made those memories meaningful have been severed with surgical precision. Tell me, Serf Valen, Brother Sergeant Cassius continues, still studying his reflection. What do you see when you look at this face? The question catches you off guard. In 37 years of service, no Space Marine has ever asked for your opinion on anything beyond the most mundane details of maintenance and protocol. You consider your words carefully, knowing that the wrong answer could result in punishment, or worse. I see the Emperor's will made manifest, my lord, you reply, using the standard liturgical response. I see humanity's guardian and defender. Brother Sergeant Cassius turns from the mirror to face you directly, and you are struck by the complete absence of human recognition in his gaze. He looks at you the way you might look at a piece of equipment, evaluating function, assessing utility, but finding nothing worthy of emotional engagement. An adequate response, he says, but not what I asked. I asked what you see, not what you have been taught to see. The question hangs in the air between you like a trap. You realize with growing dread that this is some kind of test. Brother Sergeant Cassius is evaluating not just your loyalty, but your perception, your ability to process what your eyes report versus what your conditioning tells you to believe. I see. You begin, then stop. How can you explain what you see without committing heresy? How can you describe the wrongness, the alienness, the fundamental disconnect between human expectation and post-human reality? I see someone who was once human, you say finally, but who has transcended humanity in service to the Emperor. Something that might once have been amusement flickers across his features, but it's an expression without warmth, without genuine emotion. It's the mechanical approximation of human response, learned and practiced but not felt. Transcended, he repeats, tasting the word. Yes, that is accurate. We are what humanity becomes when it abandons the weaknesses that make it human. Fear, doubt, mercy, love. These are luxuries that the universe does not permit. He turns back to the mirror, and you watch as he begins the ritual cleansing that will prepare him for tomorrow's battle. His movements are precise, mechanical, utterly without the unconscious gestures that mark human behavior. When he washes his face, it's not because he feels dirty, but because cleanliness serves tactical purposes. When he arranges his features, it's not from vanity, but from an understanding that facial expression can be used as a weapon of psychological warfare. Do you know what the most difficult part of the conditioning process was, Serf Valen? He asks as he works. You shake your head, not trusting your voice. Learning to forget what it felt like to love my mother, he continues matter-of-factly. The memory remains. I can recall every detail of her face, every word she spoke to me, but the emotional attachment had to be severed. It was inefficient. A weakness that could be exploited by the enemies of humanity. The casual tone in which he describes this psychological amputation sends chills down your spine. He speaks of losing the capacity for love the way another man might discuss having a tooth pulled, as a minor inconvenience in service of a greater good. I remember being afraid of the dark, he continues. I remember crying when I was hurt. I remember feeling joy when I succeeded at some small task. These responses were systematically identified and eliminated. Fear became tactical assessment. Pain became data. Joy became irrelevant. You stand in horrified silence as he describes the deliberate destruction of everything that makes life worth living. The capacity for emotional connection, for empathy, for the simple human pleasures that make existence bearable, all of it carved away with the same precision used to implant his additional organs. The irony, Brother Sergeant Cassius says, finally replacing his helmet, is that we do this to preserve humanity. We surrender our humanity so that humans may continue to exist. We become monsters so that you may remain human. The helmet seals engage with a soft hiss, and once again he becomes the anonymous, imposing figure of Imperial propaganda. The moment of revelation is over, the alien features hidden once more behind ceramite and steel. But you cannot forget what you have seen. Not the physical modifications, those are disturbing enough, but the psychological landscape that lies behind those enlarged eyes. The careful, deliberate removal of everything that makes existence meaningful, replaced with the cold efficiency of the perfect weapon. As Brother Sergeant Cassius leaves the reclusiam, you remain standing before the mirror, staring at your own reflection. Your face shows the wear of 37 years of service, the lines and scars of a life spent in devotion to beings who can no longer remember what devotion feels like. You see fear in your eyes, and sadness, and a terrible understanding that grows heavier with each passing moment. You serve angels who have forgotten how to be angelic. You worship saviors who have sacrificed the very qualities that make salvation meaningful. You have dedicated your life to beings who view your dedication with the same emotional investment they might show toward a functioning servitor. And the most horrifying realization of all is that this arrangement works exactly as intended. The Imperium doesn't need space marines who can love or fear or doubt. It needs weapons that can make the hard choices, that can sacrifice millions to save billions, that can commit necessary atrocities without the burden of human conscience. They are perfect soldiers precisely because they are no longer human enough to question their orders. You blow out the votive candles and prepare to leave the reclusiam, but the image lingers in your mind. Brother Sergeant Cassius studying his own reflection with the dispassionate interest of a technician examining a tool, not recognizing anything worth preserving in what he had become, not mourning what he had lost, because to mourn, you have to remember what it felt like to be human, and that is a luxury the Emperor's angels cannot afford. You are Inquisitorial Clerk Tertius Helena Vex, stationed aboard the Fortress Monastery Phalanx, and your duty is one that most Imperial citizens never learn exists: documenting the psychological casualties that result from unauthorized exposure to unhelmed space marines. Your data slate contains 17,439 case files, each one representing a human mind that has been forever altered by glimpsing the truth beneath the ceramite. Case file 17,439 lies open before you now, its contents still warm from the Vox transmission that delivered it from the battlefield of Cronus VII. The incident involved the 23rd Cadian Shock Regiment and the Salamander's 3rd Company during a joint operation against word-bearer cultists. What should have been a routine purge of heretical elements became something far more complex when Brother Captain Vulcan's helmet was breached by enemy fire during the final assault. The medical report is clinical in its precision. Explosive decompression of helmet seals resulted in complete environmental breach. Continued combat operations required sustained exposure of unprotected cranial features to Allied Imperial Guard personnel for approximately 47 minutes. 47 minutes, nearly an hour of direct visual contact between baseline humans and an unhelmed space marine. The psychological assessment team, deployed to evaluate the aftermath, found results that have become grimly familiar in your years of cataloging such incidents. Of the 112 soldiers who maintained visual contact with Brother Captain Vulcan during the engagement, 73 submitted immediate transfer requests upon return to their base of operations. The official reason given was tactical disagreements with Astartes' doctrine, but the supplementary interviews revealed the truth. They could no longer function in the presence of space marines. The sight of what lay beneath the helmet had shattered their ability to see the Adeptus Astartes as anything other than monsters wearing human shapes. Guardsman First Class Marcus Cole, a veteran of 15 years' service and holder of 3 decorations for valor, summarized the experience in his transfer request. I served the Emperor faithfully, believed in his angels, took pride in fighting alongside the Adeptus Astartes. But when I saw that face, Emperor's throne, it wasn't human. It moved like it remembered being human once, but everything that made it human was gone. I can't unknow that. I can't serve beside them anymore. 12 additional soldiers required immediate psychological reconditioning, a euphemistic term for the process of selective memory modification that allows traumatized personnel to continue functioning within Imperial military structures. The tech priests responsible for the procedure reported unusual resistance to standard conditioning protocols. The memories of Brother Captain Vulcan's face had etched themselves so deeply into their consciousness that removal risked permanent cognitive damage. 8 soldiers were declared mentally unfit for continued service and transferred to penal battalions on worlds where their knowledge could not contaminate other personnel. Their official records list various infractions: insubordination, dereliction of duty, spreading discord among the ranks, but their real crime was seeing too much and being unable to forget what they had witnessed. The remaining 7 soldiers were executed for sedition after they began openly questioning the nature of the Imperium's angels. Their conversations, recorded by embedded commissariat officers, revealed the true scope of the psychological impact. If those are humanity's saviors, what does that make us? What does that make the Emperor who created them? They're not protecting us, they're replacing us, one child at a time, one face at a time. How many worlds have seen this? How many soldiers know the truth and keep quiet out of fear? These questions, once spoken, spread like infection through the ranks. The commissariat moved swiftly to contain the outbreak, but the damage was done. 7 good soldiers, loyal servants of the Emperor, died not because they had lost faith, but because they had seen too clearly what their faith was built upon. This pattern repeats itself across the galaxy with disturbing regularity. Your files contain similar incidents from Armageddon, Cadia, Ultramar, and countless other worlds where Imperial Guard forces have operated alongside the Adeptus Astartes. The Salamander's incident on Cronus VII is merely the most recent addition to a catalog of psychological casualties that stretches back 10,000 years. The Imperial response to such incidents has evolved into a sophisticated system of information management and damage control. Standard protocols now require immediate quarantine of any personnel who witness unhelmed space marines under combat conditions. Psychological evaluation teams are deployed within hours to assess the scope of contamination and determine appropriate countermeasures. The options available are limited but effective: memory modification for those whose exposure was brief, transfer to isolated postings for those whose conditioning proves resistant, and elimination for those who pose an unacceptable security risk. The criteria for each category are carefully calibrated to minimize both the loss of useful personnel and the spread of dangerous knowledge. But perhaps the most disturbing element of your work is not the individual cases themselves, but the pattern they reveal when viewed in aggregate. The incidents are not random occurrences. They happen with statistical predictability whenever Imperial forces operate alongside Space Marines under extended combat conditions. The Adeptus Astartes are aware of this pattern, as are the highest levels of Imperial command, yet the practice continues unchanged. The conclusion is inescapable. The psychological trauma inflicted upon baseline humans is considered an acceptable cost of maintaining the Space Marine program. The Imperium has calculated that the military benefits of post-human warriors outweigh the damage caused by their inevitable exposure to normal human forces. Your data slate chimes softly, indicating the arrival of another case file. This one involves the Blood Angels 5th Company and a PDF regiment from Baal Secundus. The details are already familiar before you even open the file: helmet breach, extended exposure, psychological casualties. The same pattern playing out again as it has played out thousands of times before, as it will play out thousands of times in the future. Trooper Elena Vasquez, age 19, suffered complete psychological breakdown after witnessing Brother Sergeant Dante feeding during the aftermath of battle. Her screams could be heard 3 hab blocks away. She has since been declared mentally incompetent and assigned to a penal colony where her testimony cannot reach other Imperial citizens. Captain Roderick Holt, a 30-year veteran, submitted his resignation after observing the casual efficiency with which the Blood Angels processed civilian casualties during the purge operations. His resignation was denied, and he was subsequently transferred to a suicide mission against an Orc stronghold where his knowledge died with him. Tech Adept Gamma 77 documented physiological abnormalities in captured picked recordings before being discovered by chapter serfs. Both the Adept and the recordings have been classified as lost during combat operations, though your sources suggest both are being held in detention facilities beneath the Baal's Heart Fortress Monastery. The pattern never changes: exposure, trauma, containment, elimination. The machine that preserves the secret of the Space Marine's true nature operates with the same ruthless efficiency as the machine that creates them in the first place. You close the file and lean back in your chair, staring at the Gothic architecture of your office aboard the Phalanx. Through the reinforced viewport, you can see the Imperial fists going about their daily routines, their helmets firmly in place, their true faces hidden from view. Somewhere below in the Fortress Monastery, new aspirants are undergoing the surgeries that will transform them from human children into post-human weapons. And somewhere across the galaxy, another Imperial Guard regiment is being deployed alongside Space Marine forces, their personnel unaware that they may be volunteering to witness something that will haunt them for the rest of their likely shortened lives. The silence that surrounds this systematic trauma is perhaps the most effective weapon in the Imperium's arsenal. No one speaks of what they have seen because speaking leads to death or worse. No one questions the necessity of the Space Marine program because questioning leads to charges of heresy. No one investigates the scope of the psychological casualties because investigation leads to the same fate as the casualties themselves. And so the cycle continues, fed by the willing ignorance of a species that has forgotten the difference between necessary sacrifice and systematic horror. You turn to your next case file, knowing that tomorrow will bring another, and the day after that will bring another still. The machine that protects the secret of humanity's angels never sleeps, never stops, never acknowledges the cost of its operations. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, some truths are too terrible for human minds to bear, even when those truths wear the faces of humanity's supposed saviors. You stand in the Hall of Records on Terra, 50 kilometers beneath the surface of humanity's birthworld, surrounded by data vaults that contain the accumulated knowledge of 10 millennia. The air tastes of ozone and sacred oils, heavy with the weight of secrets that could topple governments and shatter faiths. Your clearance allows access to materials that fewer than 100 souls in the Imperium have ever seen, documents sealed with the authority of the High Lords themselves. Before you, illuminated by a single lumen strip, lies file designation, Alpha Terminus Omega. The cover bears the seal of the Emperor himself, rendered in gold leaf that still gleams after 10,000 years. Below it, in high Gothic script that seems to burn itself into your retinas, are the words that will change everything you thought you knew about humanity's guardians. Project Astartes, Psychological Warfare Assessment and Strategic Implementation Protocols. Your hands tremble as you break the seal. The first page contains a preamble that stops your heart. By Imperial decree, it is hereby acknowledged that the Adeptus Astartes program serves a dual function within the strategic framework of human expansion and consolidation. Primary function: the creation of superhuman warriors capable of operating in conditions beyond baseline human limitations. Secondary function: the establishment of a psychological warfare apparatus designed to maximize terror response in enemy populations while maintaining operational security among allied forces. Secondary function. The words echo in your mind as their full implications sink in. The dehumanization of Space Marines wasn't an unfortunate side effect of their creation. It was an intentional design feature. Every horrifying aspect of their transformation, every alien characteristic that makes baseline humans recoil in instinctive terror, was carefully calculated to serve a strategic purpose. You turn the page and find detailed psychological profiles, clinical assessments that read like blueprints for manufacturing nightmares. The enlarged cranium and predatory features weren't merely functional modifications. They were designed to trigger deep-seated evolutionary fears in human opponents. The alien movements, the inhuman vocalizations, the predatory grace that marks their every action, all of it was engineered to bypass conscious thought and strike directly at the primitive brain centers that govern fight-or-flight responses. Subject analysis. Orc warboss designation, Scarjo, encountered Ultramarines' second company during the Rin's World campaign. Post-engagement interrogation revealed subject experienced unprecedented terror response upon witnessing unhelmed Brother Captain Sicarius during close combat. Subject's own words, "Dat thing ain't right. It looks like it should be human, but it ain't. Makes my teeth itch just looking at it." Subsequent behavioral analysis indicated 73% reduction in aggressive response patterns when facing Astartes forces. The report continues with similar assessments covering encounters with Eldar, Tau, and even Chaos Space Marines. In each case, the psychological impact of witnessing unhelmed Adeptus Astartes proved devastating to enemy morale. The uncanny valley effect, the deep discomfort caused by something that appears almost human, but fundamentally isn't, served as a weapon more potent than any bolter round. But the true horror lies in the sections dealing with allied forces. Collateral psychological impact assessment. Baseline human personnel exposed to unhelmed Astartes during extended operations show predictable trauma responses that may be leveraged for strategic advantage. Recommended protocol. Controlled exposure during recruitment and training phases to establish appropriate behavioral conditioning. Personnel who adapt successfully demonstrate enhanced loyalty metrics. Personnel who fail adaptation protocols should be reassigned to duties where security concerns are minimized. The Imperium knows. They have always known. The trauma experienced by Imperial Guard regiments, the psychological casualties documented in your previous files, the systematic cover-ups and memory modifications. All of it is part of a deliberate program designed to test and condition human responses to their post-human guardians. The children who become Space Marines are not just being transformed into weapons. They are being transformed into specific types of weapons, crafted to inspire terror in enemies, while simultaneously testing the psychological resilience of their own allies. The face beneath the helmet serves as both sword and sorting mechanism, separating those humans capable of accepting post-human authority from those who must be eliminated as security risks. You find another section titled Operational Security Protocols, and the contents make your blood run cold. Helmet removal in the presence of baseline personnel serves multiple strategic functions. 1. Identification of psychologically unstable elements within allied forces. 2. Assessment of loyalty and adaptability among command personnel. 3. Establishment of terror responses in enemy forces during psychological warfare operations. 4. Maintenance of necessary fear-based respect among civilian populations. The helmets aren't just protection. They're masks, deliberately designed to hide the truth until revelation serves a strategic purpose. Every time a Space Marine removes his helmet, every traumatic exposure documented in your files, every psychological casualty and cover-up operation, it's all part of a system that's been running exactly as intended for 10,000 years. The scope of the deception becomes clear as you read further. The recruitment ceremonies where families celebrate their children's selection. The propaganda that portrays Space Marines as noble angels. The careful management of public interactions to maintain the illusion of heroic saviors. All of it serves to ensure a steady supply of both raw material for transformation and compliant population to govern. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation comes in a section marked Philosophical Implications. The Astartes program represents humanity's evolutionary necessity rather than enhancement. In a galaxy where survival requires the capacity for absolute brutality, traditional human empathy becomes a strategic liability. The transformation of children into post-human weapons serves not merely military needs, but the psychological requirement of species-level adaptation to cosmic horror. By creating beings capable of necessary atrocities without human moral constraints, the Imperium preserves the capacity for both absolute warfare and functional governance. You understand now why the program continues despite its obvious horrors. It's not about creating better soldiers. It's about creating a class of beings capable of making decisions that would destroy human minds. The Space Marines don't just fight humanity's enemies. They shoulder the moral burden of actions that would break the species' collective psyche if performed by baseline humans. Every world cleansed of civilian populations, every necessary genocide, every strategic sacrifice of millions for the survival of billions. These decisions are made and implemented by beings who retain human memories, but lack human emotional responses, allowing them to commit necessary atrocities without the psychological damage that would cripple normal human leadership. The final page of the document contains a single paragraph that crystallizes the entire program's purpose. Project Astartes succeeds not in spite of its dehumanizing effects, but because of them. By creating guardians who are simultaneously human and inhuman, the Imperium achieves the dual objectives of effective warfare and population management. The terror response generated by unhelmed Astartes serves to reinforce proper hierarchical relationships while identifying potential security threats. The program will continue indefinitely, as the alternative, a purely human military leadership, would result in either strategic ineffectiveness or species-wide psychological collapse when faced with the moral requirements of galactic survival. You close the file and step back from the reading station, your mind reeling from the implications of what you've discovered. Every assumption you held about the Imperium's moral foundation has been shattered and rebuilt in a single document. The Space Marines aren't humanity's protectors who happen to become monsters. They are monsters specifically created to protect humanity from truths too terrible for human minds to process. The face beneath the helmet isn't a secret because it's shameful. It's a secret because it's a weapon, one that works equally well against enemies and allies, separating the psychologically useful from the potentially dangerous with surgical precision. And you realize, with growing horror, that by reading this document, by understanding the true scope of the program, you have just failed your own psychological assessment. You now possess knowledge that makes you a security risk, information that cannot be allowed to spread among the general population. The lumen strip above the reading station flickers and dims, and you hear the soft whisper of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside. Through the doorway, you glimpse the familiar silhouette of power armor, moving with the predatory grace that now makes perfect, terrible sense. A Space Marine is coming to ensure that the secrets of Project Astartes remain secure, and you finally understand why so few people have ever read this file. The helmet seals disengage with a soft hiss as he enters the chamber, and for the last time in your life, you look upon the face of humanity's angels, knowing exactly what you're seeing and why it was made to look that way. The face beneath the helmet is a mirror of humanity's willing surrender to necessary monstrosity, and it is beautiful in its perfect, terrible efficiency. You return now to where this journey began, that small hab unit window on Hive World Tertius, where a tired worker witnessed something that changed everything. But now, you understand what you were truly seeing when that ceramite helmet came away. It wasn't just a face beneath the armor. It was the reflection of what humanity becomes when it abandons its soul for survival. The question that has haunted this entire exploration finally crystallizes. Was there another way? Could the Imperium have survived 10,000 years of galactic warfare without transforming its children into weapons that barely remember being human? Could humanity have faced the endless tide of Xeno's threats, heretical uprisings, and demonic incursions while maintaining its essential humanity intact? The records suggest otherwise. Every alternative military structure attempted during the Great Crusade, baseline human armies, enhanced but still human soldiers, even the Thunder Warriors who preceded the Space Marines, all proved inadequate to the scope of the threat facing humanity. The galaxy demanded protectors capable of making decisions that would break human hearts, of committing necessary atrocities without the luxury of moral anguish. The Space Marines succeed precisely because they can sacrifice 1 million civilians to save 1 billion without losing sleep. They can purge entire worlds of life and feel nothing beyond tactical satisfaction. They can look upon the suffering of baseline humans and calculate its strategic value without being paralyzed by empathy. These capabilities make them monsters by human standards. They also make them the only force in the galaxy capable of preserving human civilization against threats that exist beyond the scope of human moral frameworks. But consider the cost. Not just the individual cost, the children carved apart and rebuilt as living weapons, but the species-level cost of accepting that survival requires such guardians. Every world that celebrates the recruitment of its young into the Astartes program is celebrating the sacrifice of human potential on the altar of necessity. Every Imperial citizen who looks upon a Space Marine with awe and gratitude is participating in a system that transforms love into strategic resources. The most heroic chapters, the Ultramarines with their noble bearing, the Salamanders with their protection of civilians, the Imperial Fists with their unwavering duty, all embody this same fundamental darkness. Their heroism is possible only because they have been systematically stripped of the emotional connections that would make heroism personally meaningful. They save humans not because they love humanity, but because humanity serves strategic purposes in their programming. Even the Space Marines themselves are victims of this system, though they lack the emotional capacity to recognize their victimization. Brother Sergeant Cassius cannot mourn the loss of his ability to love his mother because the capacity for that kind of mourning has been surgically removed. The newly ascended battle brothers who study their own reflections without recognition or horror do so because horror requires an emotional investment in human identity that they no longer possess. And yet the system works. Humanity survives in a galaxy that devours species with casual efficiency. Billions of Imperial citizens live lives of relative stability, protected by guardians whose sacrificed humanity purchased that protection with 10,000 years of faithful service. The price is terrible, but the alternative, extinction, is worse. You, the viewer, must now confront your own complicity in this system. Every time you have celebrated the heroism of the Space Marines, every time you have thrilled to stories of their victories against impossible odds, every time you have admired their dedication and sacrifice, you have been celebrating the systematic dehumanization of children in service of survival. The Space Marines are heroes. They are also monsters. These facts are not contradictory. They are complementary, two sides of the same necessity that defines existence in the grim darkness of the far future. What does it say about us that we created stories celebrating such beings? What does it say about the universe we've imagined that it requires protectors who have forgotten how to be human? What does it say about our own relationship with necessary sacrifice that we find these post-human warriors compelling rather than simply horrifying? Perhaps it says that we, too, understand the terrible mathematics of survival. Perhaps it says that we recognize, on some level, that protection sometimes requires protectors who are willing to pay prices that the protected cannot bear to contemplate. The final image returns you to that window on Tertius, but now you see it with complete clarity. The tired worker, the massive armored figure, the moment when the helmet lifts away to reveal what lies beneath. But now you understand that the worker isn't just witnessing a space marine's face. He's witnessing the face of humanity's choice, written in enlarged eyes and predatory features and alien proportions. The face says, "This is what we became so that you could remain human." The face says, "This is the price we paid so that you would never have to pay it." The face says, "We are the mirror of what humanity looks like when it makes the hard choices. Look at us and understand what survival truly costs." And in that terrible understanding lies perhaps the only redemption available in the grim darkness of the far future. The knowledge that the sacrifice was conscious, deliberate, and accepted with full understanding of its cost. The Space Marines know what they have lost. The Imperium knows what it has taken. And somewhere, in the depth of their modified consciousness, the angels of death remember what they gave up so that others would never have to choose between their humanity and their survival. The face beneath the helmet is not just the face of a monster. It is the face of love transformed into something unrecognizable, but love nonetheless. And that may be the most horrifying truth of all. Somewhere tonight, on 10,000 worlds across the galaxy, another child is being selected for ascension. Another family is celebrating their good fortune. Another young human is taking their first steps toward becoming something that will one day remove its helmet and reveal what love looks like when it forgets how to recognize itself. The process never stops. The machine never sleeps. And the face in the mirror never changes because it cannot afford to remember what it once was. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And war, it seems, has a face. The Emperor protects. But sometimes, protection requires protectors who have forgotten what they are protecting. Sometimes, the greatest love is expressed through the complete abandonment of the capacity to feel love. Look upon the face of the angels and understand what humanity becomes when it chooses survival over soul. This is the price of tomorrow. This is the cost of forever. This is the face beneath the helm.